Mr. Hank Willis Thomas is here in the house today. We took him out to dinner last night and fed him some crab cakes, so he's back in Baltimore. I'll give you a little FYI on Hank. Hank received his BFA in Photography and Africana Studies at NYU, MA in Visual Criticism, and an MFA in Photography at California College of the Arts. He has gained wide recognition for his highly provocative series Branded, which addresses the commodification of African American male identity by raising questions about culture, visual culture, and the power of logos. His book, Pitch Blackness, is a strong example why he is considered one of today's most compelling artists. He is the first recipient of the Aperture West Book Prize and has received awards from both the Rockefeller Foundation and the Arcadia Fund for Art and Dialogue. He has received several public commissions in the Bay Area as a member of Cause Collective, including Along the Way at the Oakland International Airport. Screenings of his films and video were shown at the Sundance Film Festival and the New York International Video Festival. He has shown his work at the Jack Shaman Gallery in New York and at the Lisa Dent and Long and Pollock Galleries in San Francisco. His work is in the collections of the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, the International Center for Photography in New York, the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Birmingham Museum of Art, the Museum of Contemporary Art in North Miami, the Wadsworth Atheneum Museum, and the Williamson College Museum of Art, as well as the Orange County Museum in Newport Beach, California. So let's give a big hand for Hank.
Hi. So I know that you guys got to be out of here by 1, so, and it's 12:10, so it's going to be a rapid fire thing. But I have a couple of questions. I was here last year, this time, and spoke to mostly photography students. I wanted to know how many people were here for the talk last year. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Now, hey, Nate. I was just trying to figure out if I should talk about often when I speak at colleges and universities, I usually do this kind of trajectory of my career, just to kind of give you guys some ideas about how the work that you're doing now might affect what you do later. But also, I've done a lot of different work in the past couple of years that usually doesn't fit into that talk. So I wanted by a show, how about a show of hands, kind of you guys decide which one we should talk about. So all in favor of my, life story, raise your hand. And all in favor of recent highlights, raise your hand. Uh-oh, this is tough. All right, let's do wow. All right, I'm going to try to do try to rush through the old school stuff and get to new stuff, because I can't decide, because it was pretty even. You guys were supposed to decide. You're as indecisive as me. Well, I'm going to start here, and if I talk real fast, sorry. Usually when I talk about my work, I start with this quote by Carl Hancock Rux, and it says, there's something called black in America, there's something called white in America, and I know them when I see them, but I will forever be unable to explain the meaning of them because they're not real, even though they have a very real place in my daily way of seeing, and a fundamental relationship to my ever-evolving understanding of history, and a critical place in my relationship to humanity. That quote, really, I say if I could ever appropriate an artist statement, that would be it, because it says so much of the things that my work is really trying to address. And also, the root of my work kind of starts with this book, which is Sweet Fly Paper of Life, and it was a book with the collaboration between photographer Roy de Carava and poet Langston Hughes. And my mother found that book when she was about 12 years old, and it really affected her because it was the first time that she saw people of African descent kind of depicted in photographs in a way that was similar to the way she saw them. And that kind of set her on to this life goal and career of kind of inspecting and looking at images of African Americans. And this is like a research paper I recently found from 1973 that talks about an independent research project that she went to do on the black contribution of photographers 1840 to 1940. And so since then, like from that project has spawned nearly 30 books, and she's won a Guggenheim and MacArthur and all these different awards for her efforts. And she's now the chair of the photography department at NYU, at Tisch School of the Arts at NYU. Often we collaborate. We just recently came from Charlotte, North Carolina, just 2 days ago for a show called Progeny, and it's really about kind of our relationship, and it's with another mother and son team who collaborate, Dio and Fo Wilson, and this piece is called "Sometimes I See Myself in You," and it's really about this kind of reflection that I can't help or escape, where I go places and people say, "Oh, you look just like your mother," you know. And I guess recently she says she goes places and people say the same about her. So, and in 2008, I had a book published by Aperture called Pitch Blackness, and that book is the origins of it have kind of various meanings, but I think I say, well, I'll get back to that. But so what I'd like to show you is just that there's a trend in my work that I really feel like comes through all the way to today. This was a picture taken in 1993. It was my junior year in high school. Someone gave me a camera, and I was photographing the 30th anniversary of the March on Washington, and I was really fascinated by the sprinkler and how all these people were coming to the sprinkler and how this man seemed like he was almost framed by the sprinkler and also in the position that he was in. And when I look at images I took, this is senior year in high school and like sophomore year in college, I continually find that there's this theme of frames in my images, and I really found that fascinating. And to some degree, that subconsciously, I just started to really do that, literally in the studio, just my curiosity with frames and framing. And so this is sophomore year. I was always interested in trying to what's going on just outside of the frame of the camera that might affect the way viewers interpret the meaning of an image. Was the reference that I was kind of trying to draw to it. And I was really thinking about the manipulation, especially in magazines and things like that, with all that goes on behind the scenes to make someone look good that we kind of take for granted. But I never could quite address that. So I decided to take the frames outside, and I would go around and I'd kind of give people frames and say, take a picture, and then I'd try to take a picture of them taking a picture. And it was really kind of a better way for me, at least, to try to highlight the manipulation or the intentional framing in images. And so this was my senior year project, and I call it 1,000 words, and because I was always photography even before digital was, it's always been seen as a document, but I always saw it as a lie because there's so much. It's a narrow point of view in a two-dimensional space in a split second of time that we kind of often look at and try to derive meaning from. And this image kind of says the most, it sums it up about how much chance often comes into the document of photography, in that I call it serendipity in red. So that's my mother on the left. I gave her a frame and asked her to take a picture, and I thought she was being really lazy because she just put the frame over her shoulder and wasn't helping me out with my project. And I looked at my contact sheet a couple of years ago, and I saw that there were 2 frames, but it's pretty amazing that in the second frame, in the 30th of a second that I took the picture, that someone walking down the street wearing a red hat, walking down the busy streets in New York, wearing a red hat, just like my mom, decides to look into a dark restaurant, through a frame at the exact moment that someone's taking a picture, and there's also the red cup and the red ketchup on the table, and it really kind of, to me, talks about kind of how much chance plays a role in that. And so I was really thinking about those issues a lot after I graduated, but I had one major problem. I could never figure out how to frame them. And so I kind of graduated feeling deflated because I wasn't that smart. And so I graduated, and I was just working as a photographer's assistant and a production assistant on films. And I wasn't really trying. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I was making enough money as an assistant that I had no real ambition. And my mom, she says that she told me I should apply to grad school, but I think I had my own idea. But it was really, it was like 2 years later, and I didn't want to be a photographer, didn't want to be a filmmaker, and I just figured I should do something just because, I had no real goal. And by that time it was too late, and there was only a couple schools I could apply to, and one of them was this small school in San Francisco called California College of the Arts and Crafts. And I just thought it was a really stupid name. And I'd gone to NYU, which was a really big school, and so I thought going to this kind of off the beaten trail school would be really a good opportunity for me to define myself. And around that time, I was living with my cousin, and this kind of describes our relationship. It was just like me at 2 o'clock in the morning taking pictures of us with my Polaroid camera, and then him, so cool that he was sleeping with his sunglasses. And over the time, I would take these pictures, and I took this picture of him like around that time I was applying to grad school or thinking about it, and then a couple months later, in the midst of my final process of applying to grad school, he was murdered, and that kind of really shifted the direction of my work. And this picture was the first picture of mine ever displayed in a newspaper, but you also see all of these other implication. When I remember reading it, a good guy slain for a few bucks, there's all these implications that are suggested even in that statement. Like, why does it have to say a good guy slain for a few bucks? It says it places a value on kind of who we should feel sorry for and certain things, and all of these ways I could really unpack that. And also not to mention the fact that, if it were a woman, or say it was an Asian woman, would they say, a nice woman slain for a few bucks? I think it might be a totally different kind of depiction. I think it's interesting kind of how certain of our own stereotypes or ideas are kind of embedded in the way that we read the news. And I was photographing at the funeral, and I felt it was the first moment I realized that photography couldn't do enough for me, because there was nothing that I could do to like bring my cousin back or to really say what I wanted to say about that experience. And so when I graduated, I kind of went out to San Francisco, and I had this kind of burden of now trying to make work that meant something. So I would go back and photograph the place where he was killed and revisit pictures I'd taken at his funeral, and often try to photograph people who were kind of affected by his death. But I was photographing kind of an event that had already happened. It was kind of like there was like a bunch of people looking sad, and I really couldn't feel like I feel like I couldn't say enough. And in the midst of that, I started to think about what are other ways I could kind of address these issues. And my aunt, which was here, this is his mother, gave me this image, and it's a picture of him in the morgue. And it was really hard for me to look at for a long time. And this is how she identified his body. And I was really it was hard to me to look at, but it was also strange to see that he wasn't Sunga Willis, this amazing person I knew, but this number 00602, which at the time that we couldn't even afford to have like a tombstone. And I started thinking, then my mother got diagnosed with cancer. She's still alive, obviously, and my grandmother got diagnosed with cancer, and she's also still alive. But in the midst of like this kind of period, I thought I was going to be losing all these people who were really important to me in a very short period of time. And I still had these relationships with people who were not my friends, but my cousin's friends, and some of my friends who were affected by kind of what happened because they were close to him, and my mother's friends and friends that we shared. And I started to do this project, and it was called Bearing Witness Murder's Wake. And I wanted to try to take a portrait of my cousin through people who I knew who were affected by his life or death, because I realized if you're not rich, the really only evidence of your existence, are the people who bear witness to it, to the people who knew and loved you. And so this was like this incomplete portrait of my cousin, this futile attempt, and I would leave these blank spots in the installations of it, and this, you can see it's my first departure, as a way to signify the people who I'd never know or never photograph, in this incomplete portrait. And around the same time, I was reading a book called Michael Jordan and the New Trans-Global Economy, and it was talked about how Nike went basically from being a $10 million company when Michael Jordan signed in 1984 to being a $10 billion company when he finally retired in like 2003, and all the different ways that different industries from cable